The town of Willow Creek had its fair share of mysteries, but none as peculiar as the stray dog that roamed its streets. No one knew where he came from, and no one had ever seen him beg for food. He never barked, never caused trouble, just watched, always watching. The townsfolk called him Shadow because he seemed to appear and disappear like one. Some claimed he followed people home, but never crossed their doorsteps. Others swore he saved a child from wandering onto the road one evening, gently nudging the boy back onto the sidewalk before vanishing into the night. One person, however, took a special interest in him. Lena Carter, a journalist who had moved to Willow Creek for a quieter life. She often spotted Shadow lingering near her home, his golden brown eyes fixed on her as if he knew something she didn't. One stormy night, as Lena sat by her window, she noticed Shadow standing across the street, completely still despite the howling wind. Lightning flashed, and for a brief second, she could swear she saw something behind him, a figure, watching her. But when the lightning flashed again, both the figure and Shadow were gone. Something wasn't right. The days that followed that stormy night seemed ordinary enough. The sun came up as usual, and the town of Willow Creek went about its business. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like the calm before a storm. It wasn't just Shadow's strange presence anymore. There was a nagging sensation, a subtle change in the air, as though something dark was slowly creeping into the town, unnoticed. Lena spent the next few days investigating her suspicions, digging through old town records, and asking locals about Shadow. Everyone seemed to have seen him, but no one knew where he came from. One thing stood out. No one ever mentioned him in detail. They spoke of his quiet manner, his strange watchfulness, and his apparent habit of appearing at moments when danger loomed. But the more Lena probed, the more she noticed that everyone's recollections seemed incomplete. There were whispers, too, that Shadow had always been there, ever since she'd moved to Willow Creek, even though she had only seen him recently. The more Lena pressed, the more she felt like she was hitting a wall. It was as if the people around her were either avoiding the topic or afraid to talk about it. But the more Lena investigated, the more certain she became. There was something Shadow knew that they didn't, and whatever it was important. Late one night, Lena was on her way home from the local library when she saw him again. Shadow. He stood at the corner of her street, his head slightly turned, as if he was waiting for her. Lena hesitated, but felt an inexplicable pull to him. As she approached, the air felt heavier, colder, almost as if the night itself was holding its breath. The wind had died down, and all that was left was the rhythmic tapping of her shoes on the pavement. The dog didn't move, but his eyes locked onto hers, as if beckoning her to follow. A strange instinct drove her to do just that. She crossed the street, her heart beating faster, unsure of what was happening, but certain that it was important. Shadow remained still, watching her every step, and then, as she drew closer, he began to walk in the direction of the woods that bordered the town. Lena knew these woods well. They stretched for miles beyond Willow Creek, a dense tangle of trees and undergrowth that locals avoided after dark. There were stories about the woods, old rumors that spoke of strange happenings and unexplained disappearances. But Lena wasn't afraid. There was something calming about Shadow's presence, something that urged her forward. She followed him into the woods, the moonlight filtering through the canopy above, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The path was narrow and winding, and with every step, Lena felt as though she were crossing into a world that was both ancient and forgotten. The further she walked, the more the air seemed to thicken, and the sounds of the town faded into silence. The only sound now was the rustle of leaves beneath her feet and the soft patting of Shadow's paws. After what felt like an eternity, they came to a clearing. At its center was an old stone well, its edges overgrown with ivy and moss. Shadow stopped in front of it, sitting on his haunches, and looked up at Lena with his piercing golden eyes. Lena approached cautiously, but there was a strange pull in her chest, as if the well was calling to her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she took a step back. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Shadow, as if understanding her question, stood up and walked toward the edge of the well. He barked once, softly, almost like a warning, and then turned to face her, his eyes never leaving hers. Lena hesitated, but stepped closer to the well. She could see nothing inside but darkness, deep, endless darkness. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she felt like she was being drawn into that abyss, as though it was pulling at her very soul. The air grew colder still, and she shivered despite herself. That's when she heard it, the faintest sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Help!" Lena froze, her heart pounding. The voice had come from the well, but it wasn't her imagination. The voice was real. Someone was down there. She leaned over the edge, peering into the blackness, her pulse racing. "Hello," she called out, but there was no response, just the eerie stillness of the woods and the unsettling weight of the silence. Then, before she could retreat, Shadow let out a low growl, a deep, warning sound that made the hairs on her arms rise. He padded to her side and nudged her gently with his nose, as if urging her to step back. Lena took one more look into the well, her mind racing. What was this place? And who had called for help? Suddenly, a loud rustling sound broke the stillness. Shadow immediately tensed, his body going rigid. Lena glanced around, but there was nothing in sight, nothing but shadows and trees. But she could feel it. They weren't alone anymore. From the darkness beyond the clearing, several figures emerged. They moved quickly, too quickly for human eyes to track. The figures were cloaked, their faces hidden in shadow. They moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, as though they weren't quite human at all. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She instinctively backed up, stepping closer to Shadow, who stood between her and the cloaked figures, his body tense but unwavering. The figures stopped at the edge of the clearing, and one of them, the leader, stepped forward. It was a man, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed faintly red, like embers smoldering in the dark. "You should not have come here," the man said, his voice low and chilling. Lena swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking, but defiant. The man's lips twisted into a thin smile. "We are the guardians of the well, and you, little one, are not meant to be here." As if to emphasize his point, the figures behind him shifted, and for a moment their forms flickered like shadows, inhuman shapes that seemed to blur and distort. Lena's gaze flicked to Shadow. He stood firm, unflinching. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. "Shadow, what's going on?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. But before the dog could respond, or even move, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The well seemed to pulse with energy, and the air thickened. becoming suffocating. Something ancient and powerful was waking, and the guardians had come to stop it. The air was thick with tension, and every instinct in Lena screamed for her to run. But there was something about the cloaked figures, something about the leader's unsettling red eyes, that rooted her to the spot. She didn't know who or what they were, but she could feel the weight of their presence, heavy and oppressive. Shadow, however, was calm, his body a perfect statue of stillness as he faced the figures. The leader's glowing red eyes never left the dog, and for a moment it seemed as though the two were locked in some silent battle, a struggle of wills that Lena could not comprehend. The leader stepped forward, his movements smooth and predatory, like a wolf closing in on prey. "You shouldn't have come, girl," he repeated, his voice low, like the growl of a predator. "The well is not a place for the living." Lena's heart raced, but she squared her shoulders, determined not to show fear. "What do you want with me? What is this place?" she demanded. The leader stopped just short of where she stood, his eerie smile widening. "This place is the threshold," he said, "a gateway to something far older than you could possibly understand. And you, girl, have unlocked it." Lena's mind raced. A gateway? To what? She glanced at the well, still too dark to see anything within. It wasn't just a well. It was a portal, a passage to something beyond her comprehension. But what was it? And why had she been drawn here? Shadow barked, breaking the silence, and the leader's smile faltered for just a moment. "Ah, yes," the man said with a sigh, as though dealing with an inconvenience. "The guardian has arrived. It seems fate has decided this night shall be different." The leader turned, his gaze now fixed on the well. "We've waited long enough. It is time to awaken what lies beneath." Lena didn't understand. What was he talking about? What was this awakening? Her eyes darted between the cloaked figures, who now stood perfectly still, as if they were waiting for something. She turned to Shadow, looking for answers. Shadow's golden eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw something new in them, something powerful and ancient. It wasn't fear or hesitation, it was certainty. Lena took a deep breath. She had to act. If this was truly a portal, if these people, or whatever they were, had been guarding it for centuries, then the danger must be immense. And Shadow, the silent guardian, was standing between her and whatever threat lay beyond the well. The ground began to rumble beneath her feet, pulling her attention back to the well. It had started. The ancient power stirring beneath the earth was waking. A crack appeared along the stone surface of the well, and a low, echoing sound reverberated through the air, a sound that made the hairs on Lena's neck stand on end. It was as though the very earth itself was groaning in pain, releasing something that had been locked away for centuries. Lena took a step back, but Shadow didn't move. He stood firm, his body tense, his ears flat against his skull. The rumbling grew louder, and the air became heavy with an unnatural chill. The leader stepped closer to the well, raising a hand. The other cloaked figures followed suit, their hands outstretched toward the well, as if they were channeling some unseen force. The air shimmered around them, and Lena felt a pressure build, a weight that threatened to crush her chest. Then, as if the universe had been holding its breath, the ground cracked open. A flash of blinding light erupted from the well, followed by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. Lena's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a portal, it was a prison, and whatever had been locked inside for so long had just been freed. The ground around the well split open further, and from the cracks, something began to rise. It wasn't just one thing, it was an entire swarm of creatures, dark and formless, writhing and twisting like shadows given life. Their eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and their mouths opened in wide, gaping grins, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Lena froze in horror as the creatures emerged from the well, their movements jerky and unnatural. They seemed to be drawn to the cloaked figures, who stood motionless, their arms still raised, as though controlling the creatures. The leader turned to Lena, his smile widening. "You see now," he said, his voice low and almost triumphant. "This is what we've been waiting for. The awakening, and you, little girl, have brought it about." Lena felt her stomach twist in fear. These were no ordinary creatures. They were shadows, creatures born from the dark, from the very essence of nightmares. And whatever these cloaked figures were, they were their masters. Shadow barked again, louder this time, and stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He wasn't afraid. The leader's gaze shifted to Shadow, and for the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You think you can stop us, dog?" he sneered. "You're just a stray, a worthless creature. You have no power here." But Shadow didn't flinch. His body tensed, and for a moment, he seemed to glow, his golden fur shimmering with an otherworldly light. His eyes blazed with the intensity of a force that Lena couldn't comprehend. And in that moment, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just a stray who had wandered into her life by chance. He was the guardian, the one who had been sent to protect the town from this very threat. Lena stepped back, her mind racing. She knew she had to help him, but how? She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a guardian. She was just a journalist who had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. But Shadow needed her. Lena took a deep breath and ran toward the well. She had no plan, no weapon, nothing but the belief that somehow, together, they could stop whatever these creatures were. As she reached the edge of the well, Shadow barked once more, and the creatures stopped in their tracks, their glowing eyes shifting toward him. The leader raised his hand, as if commanding them to attack, but Shadow stood his ground. Lena's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This was the battle that would decide Willow Creek's fate, and it would be Shadow who would face the true power of the ancient forces. But would he survive the fight? The creatures halted, their glowing eyes locked on Shadow, who stood tall and resolute in front of Lena. The air around them hummed with energy, the power of the ancient forces awakening with every passing second. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the fight for the future of Willow Creek, and perhaps for the world itself. Shadow didn't flinch. His fur shimmered with an ethereal glow, his golden eyes burning with a fierce determination. Lena could feel a strange connection to him now, a bond she hadn't fully understood until this very moment. He was more than just a stray dog. He was the guardian, the protector who had been sent to stand against the darkness that threatened to swallow everything. The cloaked figures, still silent, stood back as the creatures began to inch forward, their twisted forms moving with unnatural speed. The leader smiled, his red eyes gleaming with a mixture of arrogance and dark satisfaction. "You cannot defeat us, Guardian," he said, his voice low and cold. We were here long before your kind ever existed. You are nothing but a fleeting interruption." But Shadow remained unmoving, his gaze unyielding. He wasn't just facing these creatures, he was facing something much larger. The weight of centuries of guardianship was upon him, and Lena could sense that this moment had been destined from the start. Suddenly, one of the shadow creatures lunged forward, its massive claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. But Shadow was faster. With a single leap, he collided with the creature, knocking it back with a strength Lena hadn't known he possessed. The creature howled, its body twisting violently as it tried to regain its footing. The other creatures reacted instantly, charging toward Shadow. But Lena wasn't going to stand by and watch. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. Without thinking, she grabbed a nearby branch, her hand shaking, and hurled it toward the nearest creature. It struck the creature in the side, causing it to stagger and falter. Shadow seized the opportunity. With a powerful growl, he charged, his teeth sinking into the creature's shadowy form. It screeched in agony before dissolving into a cloud of dark mist, vanishing into the air. Lena couldn't believe her eyes. Shadow was more powerful than she had ever imagined. The leader, seeing his forces begin to falter, raised his hands once more, channeling an even darker power. The ground beneath them trembled, and the creatures surged forward in a frenzied attack. But this time, something was different. The well beneath them began to pulse with energy. Its dark power was being fought by an even greater force. Shadow, though outnumbered, was not alone. Lena stepped forward, drawing on the strength that had come from her bond with Shadow. She wasn't going to let this town fall into darkness. She wasn't going to let the creatures of the well win. She raised her hand toward the well, her voice trembling as she shouted, "We won't let you take over." As if in response, Shadow let out a powerful bark, his form glowing brighter than ever. The ground beneath them split open again, but this time it was the light of Shadow's power that broke through. The dark mist that had poured from the well began to retract, swirling back into the depths from which it had come. The creatures screeched and tried to fight against it, but their power was fading. With a final, deafening roar, Shadow leapt into the heart of the chaos. His golden fur gleamed like a beacon of light, his body moving with the grace of a creature determined to protect everything he loved. The light from within him intensified, and in that moment, Lena understood. It wasn't just the well that had been awakened, it was Shadow. His power wasn't just about strength, it was about purpose. He was the one who had been destined to face the ancient dark forces, the one who could push back the shadows and protect the living from their malevolent grasp. His light, his spirit, was stronger than the darkness that sought to destroy everything. The leader screamed in fury, his red eyes blazing with rage. But it was too late. The creatures that had once been his minions were dissolving, and the power that had held the town in its grasp was beginning to fade. The well, which had once seemed so menacing, now appeared to be collapsing in on itself, its power diminishing as the last of the shadowy creatures were consumed by Shadow's light. Lena stood in awe, watching as the darkness retreated, and the power of the well was sealed away once more. The town, which had been on the brink of disaster, was safe for now. Shadow, the silent guardian, had done what no one else could. He had saved Willow Creek. As the light faded and the creatures were gone, Shadow walked back to Lena's side, his golden fur still shimmering with a soft glow. He nudged her gently with his nose, and for the first time, she realized that he had never needed to speak. His actions, his unwavering loyalty, had said everything. Lena looked down at him, a sense of gratitude swelling in her chest. You saved us, she whispered. But who are you really? Shadow's golden eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Lena swore she saw something deeper in them, a knowing, a secret that was too vast to understand. Without another word, Shadow turned and began to walk away. He didn't look back, but Lena knew he wasn't leaving for good. He had come to fulfill his purpose, and now that it was complete, his duty was done. But perhaps, someday, he would return. Lena watched him disappear into the woods, a silent guardian, ever watchful, ever protecting. Willow Creek was safe for now, but Lena knew that as long as Shadow was out there, no darkness would ever truly claim the town.